boarding gate was buzzing with the usual shuffle of rolling suitcases and muffled announcements. Families squeezed past business travelers, flight attendants hurried down the jet bridge, and passengers lined up by zone, eager to claim their seats. In the middle of it all stood a man who looked out of place not because of his clothing, but because of the quiet dignity he carried. His jacket was pressed, his shoes polished. Pinned proudly to his chest was a Silver Star medal, a symbol of valor, sacrifice, and stories most people would never hear. He had been assigned a seat in first class. A rare courtesy extended to him after the airline staff noticed his veteran's ID at check-in. He didn't ask for it, didn't demand it, but the gesture had brought the faintest smile to his weathered face. For once, he thought, maybe people still remembered. But minutes after he settled into the wide leather chair near the front of the cabin, a flight attendant leaned down with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sir, I'm afraid there's been a change," she said flatly. The veteran looked up, confused. "A change?" "Yes," she continued briskly, lowering her voice. "We'll need you to move to economy. A priority passenger requires this seat." The words hung heavy in the air. Passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to listen, others sneaking curious glances. The old soldier's hand brushed against the medal pinned to his chest. He had been decorated for gallantry under fire, for acts of courage that saved lives. Yet here, in a quiet airplane cabin thousands of miles from the battlefield, he was being told he wasn't a priority. Slowly, painfully, he rose to his feet. His knees cracked with the weight of age, but his back stayed straight, posture trained by years of discipline. He gathered a worn leather bag and tucked inside a folded photograph, its edges frayed from years in his wallet. It showed a group of young men in uniform, some of whom never made it back home. The flight attendant ushered him down the narrow aisle toward economy. His medal caught the light briefly before disappearing into the shadows of cramped rows. A few passengers glanced up, but no one spoke. No one stopped it, and in that silence an injustice had been done. "Where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments." The old veteran lowered himself into the narrow economy seat, his broad shoulders struggling against the confines of the row. The cushion sagged beneath his weight, and the armrest dug sharply into his side. He adjusted his posture, trying not to let the discomfort show, though every movement betrayed the stiffness of bones long worn down by years of service. Across the aisle, a child peeked at him curiously. The boy, no older than 8, clutched a sketchbook in his lap. He had been drawing airplanes, tanks, and stick figures with bright smiles. When he saw the medal still pinned to the veteran's chest, his eyes lit up with admiration. "Are you a soldier?" the boy whispered, leaning closer. The veteran smiled faintly, his lined face softening. "I was," he said gently. His voice carried the weight of memory, but also the kindness of someone who didn't want to burden a child with details. The boy flipped a page in his sketchbook and began drawing again. This time he sketched a soldier standing tall, medal gleaming, saluting the sky. He tore the page out carefully and held it across the aisle. "This is for you," he said shyly. The old man's hand trembled as he accepted the drawing. He stared at it for a long moment, the colors blurring in his watery eyes. For years, strangers had walked past him without a word, some barely noticing the medal he wore. Yet this small boy with crayons and innocence had seen him, had honored him in a way no airline seat ever could. But the moment didn't last. A flight attendant returned, her expression tight. She noticed the drawing in the veteran's hand, the boy watching with a proud smile. With a curt motion, she reached across and snatched the paper away. "Sir, please refrain from passing things across the aisle. It disrupts boarding," she said sharply. Then, almost as an afterthought, she crumpled the child's drawing and shoved it into her pocket. The boy gasped. "That was his," he protested, but his small voice was drowned by the shuffle of passengers stowing bags overhead. The veteran remained still, eyes fixed on the attendant. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He had seen worse forms of disrespect in his life, and silence had become his shield. Still, deep inside, something cracked. Not just in him, but in everyone watching. Several passengers had noticed. A businessman sipped his coffee without a word. A woman muttered under her breath, "They're just making a scene." A teenager rolled his eyes and turned up his music. The boy's mother whispered, "It's fine, honey. Just let it go." She smoothed the child's hair, trying to hush him, but the boy's face burned red with frustration. His innocent gift had been taken. discarded like it meant nothing. The veteran slowly unzipped his bag and pulled out the old photograph he'd tucked away earlier. He set it on the tray table, tracing the faces with a calloused finger. Young men in uniform, frozen in time, smiling, unaware of how few would survive. He remembered the night they earned that silver star. Remembered the screams, the smoke, the impossible decisions. Those men had given everything, and now here he was, quietly humiliated over a seat and a child's drawing. The boy across the aisle leaned forward again, whispering urgently, "You're still a hero to me." Those words hit harder than any insult. The veteran turned his head and gave the boy a small nod. It wasn't much, but it was enough to show he'd heard. Enough to show he still believed honor existed in small places, even if adults had forgotten it. The plane continued to fill, passengers squeezing past with tired expressions. Most had already moved on, unconcerned with what had just happened. To them, it was just another boarding delay, just another passenger shifted to the back. But in that quiet corner of the cabin, a fragile moment of respect had been shattered, and a deeper injustice had been carved into the hearts of those few who had noticed. And yet, not everyone had remained silent. In the shadows of first class, a man in dark sunglasses had been watching everything, his eyes hidden but his presence impossible to ignore. He hadn't spoken yet, hadn't moved, but the air seemed to thicken with the weight of his silence. The veteran didn't know it yet, but someone else had seen. Someone who would not let this insult pass unanswered. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as boarding finished, and the hum of voices lowered into scattered whispers. The aisle was crowded with people still stowing bags, tugging jackets, and swapping seats. But the real weight inside that aircraft was not the luggage. It was the silence. The Silver Star veteran sat motionless, staring at the seat back in front of him. His metal caught faint glints from the overhead lights, but no one commented on it anymore. Around him, the world moved as though nothing had happened, as though forcing a decorated soldier into economy was routine, unremarkable. The boy across the aisle still looked shaken. His crayons lay scattered on the tray table, but he didn't draw. His eyes flicked between the crumpled scrap in the attendant's pocket and the quiet figure of the veteran. He wanted to speak again, but the stern look from his mother kept him silent. That silence, however, was not empty. It was filled with judgment. A businessman 2 rows ahead leaned toward his colleague and muttered just loud enough for others to hear. "Honestly, it's just a seat. These veterans think the world owes them everything." The colleague chuckled, sipping his coffee. "Yeah, medals don't mean priority boarding. Times have changed." Their words stung like blades, though neither the veteran nor the boy replied. Nearby, a young woman in designer clothes raised her phone discreetly, angling it to capture a photo. "This will go viral," she whispered to her friend, smirking. "Old guy gets mad over seating. Entitlement at its peak." She tapped at her screen, already drafting a caption. Others chimed in with whispers, some laced with pity, others with irritation. Maybe he should have booked properly. Rules are rules. People get so dramatic. The chorus of murmurs built like a cruel background track, each note pressing harder against the dignity of the man who had once commanded soldiers in battle. Here in a metal tube 30,000 feet from glory, his legacy was reduced to gossip. And yet no one stood up. No one challenged the attendants. No one defended the boy whose drawing had been stolen. The veteran adjusted his cap and sat a little straighter, refusing to let the comments bend him. Still inside, a quiet ache grew. He had fought for the freedom of strangers, men, women, and children he would never know. And now, those same strangers looked at him not with gratitude, but with annoyance, like he was an inconvenience to their flight schedule. The boy, unable to contain himself, whispered again across the aisle. "They're wrong. You're not entitled. You're a hero." The mother hushed him quickly, glancing around nervously. "Stop it, honey. Don't get involved." But her words carried the same weight as the others. Don't get involved. That was the theme of the entire cabin. A flight attendant walked by, checking seatbelts. Her eyes skimmed over the veteran, but instead of respect, there was a hint of impatience. "Sir, please keep your belongings under the seat. We can't make exceptions." He nodded silently, tucking the old photograph back into his bag, though his fingers lingered on it as if it were the only anchor he had left. The whispers didn't stop. They grew softer, more insidious, Every sideways glance, every roll of the eyes became another layer of judgment. And yet not all passengers were so dismissive. A middle-aged man in the back clenched his fists, clearly uncomfortable. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but then hesitated, catching the eyes of others who seemed ready to glare him into silence. He sank back into his seat. That was the problem. The silent majority wasn't cruel, but they weren't brave either. They sat in stillness, watching injustice unfold like it was a bad in-flight movie, too awkward to speak, too afraid to be the one voice that challenged the system. The boy shifted again, restless. "Why won't anyone do anything?" He whispered fiercely to his mother. She only sighed. "Because it's not our business." The words hit harder than any insult. Not our business. As though respect for sacrifice, honor, and service was optional, situational, disposable. The veteran closed his eyes for a moment. He remembered the battlefield where silence could mean death, where inaction could cost lives. Back then, his men had relied on one another, stepping into danger without hesitation. No one had said, "Not my business," when lives were on the line. And yet here in this cabin, silence was the law, but not for everyone. In the first-class cabin, separated by just a curtain, someone else had been watching. The man in black sunglasses hadn't moved much, but his presence radiated tension. His arms were crossed, his jaw set. For now he let the silence stretch, let the injustice pile higher, because when he finally stood, the silence would shatter like glass. The engines hummed louder as the final boarding door closed, sealing the passengers into the pressurized silence of the aircraft. The attendants walked briskly through the aisles, checking belts and overhead bins, their smiles mechanical, their eyes sharp with control. The veteran sat rigid, hands resting on his knees. His gaze remained fixed on the seat back ahead, but inside his chest emotions churned like a storm. Humiliation, resignation, and the dull ache of being dismissed again. He had faced fire and chaos on battlefields, but nothing cut deeper than being made invisible by the people he had once fought for. The boy across the aisle hadn't stopped watching him. His crayons were untouched now, the paper blank. Every few seconds his small fists clenched, as if he wanted to do something. Anything but his mother's hand kept him tethered to silence. A voice crackled through the overhead speakers. "Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff." The captain's calm tone masked the turbulence brewing inside the cabin. The air felt heavy, like everyone sensed something was wrong, but no one wanted to admit it. The whispers had stopped, but so had the warmth. A strange tension lingered, stretching tighter with each passing second. It was then that movement stirred in the first-class cabin. Behind the curtain, a tall man in a black jacket shifted in his seat. He removed his sunglasses slowly, revealing piercing eyes that swept the cabin with quiet intensity. Steven Seagal wasn't just another passenger. His presence carried an unmistakable weight, like a storm waiting to break. At first, no one noticed. He seemed just another first-class traveler adjusting for comfort. But those who looked closely could see the difference. The way his eyes locked on the veteran, the way his jaw clenched when he noticed the crumpled drawing peeking from the attendant's pocket. Seagal leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. To the untrained eye, it looked casual. But to anyone who understood body language, it was readiness. The kind of readiness that meant he wasn't just observing, he was preparing. The boy noticed first. His eyes widened as he whispered to his mother, "Mom, that's Steven Seagal." She gave him a warning look. Not now, but the boy couldn't look away. He could sense something different in this man's silence. Unlike the other passengers who had turned away, this one was waiting. The flight attendants continued their routine, oblivious to the shift in atmosphere. One passed the veteran again, this time pressing a hand against his shoulder. "Sir, please sit back properly. We don't want any issues during takeoff." The old soldier gave no reply. He straightened further, if only to prove that dignity couldn't be pushed down. His Silver Star medal caught the light once more, flashing like a silent beacon, and Seagal saw it. His eyes narrowed. The faintest breath escaped him, almost like a growl hidden beneath calm. He leaned back, folding his arms across his chest, but his attention never wavered from the injustice he had just witnessed. The boy's whisper traveled again, urgent this time. "He's going to do something. I know it." The veteran, unaware of the eyes locked on him from across the curtain, lowered his gaze to the old photograph resting on his lap. His thumb brushed over the faces of young men frozen in youth, comrades who had once charged forward without hesitation. The silence of this cabin reminded him of something else, the deadly quiet before battle. Seagal shifted again. He reached into the seat pocket in front of him, not for a magazine or phone, but for stillness. His hands rested together, fingers flexing slightly as though rehearsing. The cabin crew's voices echoed faintly as they ran through safety instructions. But no one was really listening anymore. There was something electric in the air now, something unspoken that prickled the skin of even those who couldn't name it. The businessman who had mocked the veteran earlier glanced around uneasily, sensing the shift but not understanding it. The woman who had taken a sneaky photo lowered her phone, her smirk fading. The silence was no longer ordinary. It was tense, expectant. The boy leaned forward, eyes locked on the curtain that separated economy from first class. He whispered one last time, more to himself than anyone else. Something's coming. And he was right, because Steven Seagal had seen enough. The injustice wasn't just an insult to one man. It was an insult to every man who had ever sacrificed for honor. The curtain still hung in place, but the energy behind it was undeniable. The passengers didn't know it yet, but the flight they thought would be routine was about to be interrupted. Not by turbulence, not by weather, by justice. The engines roared louder, preparing for takeoff. The cabin lights dimmed and passengers leaned back, ready for the long flight ahead. But one man was no longer content to sit still. Steven Seagal shifted in his seat, his massive frame unfolding slowly, deliberately, like a mountain rising from the earth. He pulled the curtain aside with one hand and stepped into the economy cabin. The subtle gesture commanded instant attention. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Heads turned. The tension, already heavy, grew electric. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, scanning the rows with an expression carved from stone. His gaze landed on the veteran, slumped in his narrow seat, Silver Star medal catching faint glimmers of light, and then slid to the flight attendant who had shoved him there. The silence broke when Seagal's voice rumbled through the cabin. "Why is this man sitting here?" The words weren't loud, but they cut through the air like a blade. Passengers froze, eyes darting between Seagal and the attendant. The attendant straightened, trying to maintain composure. "Sir, please return to your seat. We're preparing for takeoff." Seagal didn't move. His arms folded across his chest and his tone deepened. "This man wears the Silver Star. You don't move a soldier who's bled for this country into the back of the plane." "Not while I'm on board," gasps rippled through the rows. A few passengers who had stayed silent before now leaned forward, curiosity burning in their eyes. The businessman who had mocked the veteran earlier shifted uncomfortably, suddenly wishing he hadn't spoken. The attendant's voice grew sharp, defensive. "Sir, these are airline procedures. Certain priority passengers." Seagal stepped closer, towering over her. His presence was overwhelming, his stillness more intimidating than shouting. "Priority?" He repeated, his voice dropping to a growl. "That medal means priority. That man means priority." The boy across the aisle grinned wide, tugging at his mother's sleeve. "I told you," he whispered, nearly bouncing in his seat. The veteran, still seated, looked up slowly. His eyes met Seagal's, and for the first time since boarding, they softened. There was recognition there, not of celebrity, but of respect. Seagal extended his hand. "Sir, come with me." The veteran hesitated, humility written across his face. "It's fine," he said quietly. "I don't want trouble." But Seagal shook his head. "You've already been through enough. This is nothing." His words carried the weight of command, the kind of authority that couldn't be trained into someone. It came from experience, from presence, from truth. The attendant stammered, "Sir, please, if you don't sit down, we'll have to..." But she didn't finish, because by now every eye in the cabin was on Seagal, and no one, not even the staff, doubted that he was in control. He placed a hand gently on the veteran's shoulder, steady but firm. "You've earned more than this. Follow me." The cabin erupted in whispers. Some passengers fumbled for their phones, recording the moment. Others clapped softly, too hesitant to make it bold but unable to contain their support. The veteran rose, slow but steady, his back straighter now than it had been all flight. For the first time, dignity returned to his posture. He followed Seagal toward the curtain, toward the first-class cabin he never should have been forced out of. As they passed, The boy reached out, brushing the man's sleeve. "Told you you're a hero," he whispered. The veteran gave him a faint smile. Seagal paused at the curtain, turning to face the stunned passengers and the staff who still looked caught between protocol and panic. His eyes swept across the cabin, cold and unwavering. "Respect isn't optional," he said. "Not on my watch." And with that, he guided the veteran back to the seat he deserved. For the first time that flight, the silence in the cabin wasn't judgmental. It wasn't apathetic. It was awe. The curtain fell back into place, sealing the veteran into first class once again. For a moment, there was silence, but it wasn't the uncomfortable quiet from before. It was charged, like the air just after a thunderclap. Everyone in the cabin knew the balance of power had shifted. Steven Seagal didn't return to his seat right away. Instead, he stood in the aisle, his towering frame blocking the attendant who had ordered the veteran back to economy. His arms were folded, his gaze fixed on her, unblinking. "You owe this man an apology," he said evenly, his voice low but carrying to the far end of the plane. The attendant flushed, glancing around nervously. Her colleague hurried forward, whispering frantically, "Just let it go, Dana. He's Steven Seagal." But Dana squared her shoulders, clinging to authority. "Sir, we're following procedure." "You can't dictate seating arrangements." Seagal took a single step forward. It wasn't aggressive, but it was enough to make the attendant stumble back. His voice hardened. "Procedure doesn't give you the right to humiliate a veteran. You didn't move him because of procedure. You moved him because someone richer, louder, or more connected wanted his seat. Isn't that the truth?" Gasps broke through the cabin. Phones tilted higher, passengers recording every second. The attendant's face turned pale. She stuttered, I don't have to," but she didn't finish, because the intercom dinged. "Cabin crew, report to the cockpit." It was the captain. The timing was perfect, almost faded. The second attendant gave Dana a panicked look. "They know," she hissed under her breath. "They saw." Seagal leaned closer, his voice a whisper that everyone still somehow heard. "Looks like your flight's been grounded before it even took off." Moments later, 2 compliance officers boarded the plane. Their uniforms stood out against the sea of casual travelers. One of them carried a tablet already streaming live reports from passenger complaints. Complaints that had started flooding in the moment Seagal stood up. The officers stopped at row 7, directly in front of the attendants. "Which one of you ordered a Silver Star veteran moved from first class to economy?" Dana froze. No words came. The passengers, however, didn't stay silent this time. "It was her," the businessman from earlier said, pointing. "I saw it." His voice, once mocking, now wavered as if trying to erase his earlier judgment. Others chimed in quickly. "She crumpled a child's drawing. She humiliated him in front of everyone. She said it was procedure." The officers exchanged grim looks. One tapped at his tablet, logging the testimonies. The other nodded firmly. "You'll need to come with us," Dana sputtered. "You can't just—" But Seagal interrupted, his voice calm, final. "You already did this to yourself." The cabin erupted in a mixture of cheers and clapping. Passengers who had been silent before now leaned forward, energized by the justice unfolding in real time. Even the boy, too young to fully understand compliance officers or airline policy, joined in the applause, his small hands smacking together with raw excitement. The officers escorted Dana and her colleague off the plane. As they walked down the aisle, heads turned, phones recorded, and the sound of clapping followed them like a drumbeat of accountability. When the doors closed behind them, the cabin felt lighter. The tension that had hung like a storm cloud dissipated, replaced by something rare on an airplane: unity. Seagal finally returned to the veteran's side. He bent slightly, speaking so only the old soldier could hear. "You've carried burdens bigger than anyone here could imagine. You shouldn't have to carry disrespect too." The veteran's eyes glistened. His voice cracked as he whispered back, "I didn't expect anyone to stand up." Seagal placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Then you forgot one thing. We don't leave heroes behind." The applause hadn't stopped yet. It grew louder, echoing through the cabin as the veteran slowly sat taller in his reclaimed seat. The boy across the aisle grinned proudly, whispering to his mother, "See? Heroes protect heroes." And for the first time that day, the veteran smiled. Not the polite, tired smile of a man used to fading into the background, but a genuine one. A smile that said he had been seen, respected, honored. As the plane prepared once again for takeoff, the captain's voice returned over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We've had to make a brief adjustment before departure. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the distinguished veteran aboard with us today. On behalf of this crew and this airline, we thank you for your service. The cabin erupted in cheers once more. This time, no one stayed silent. And in that moment, justice wasn't just served. It was celebrated. The hum of the engines finally steadied. The cabin lights dimmed, and for the first time since boarding, the atmosphere felt calm. The boy who had been clutching his torn drawing now carefully unfolded a fresh sheet of paper his mother handed him. With quick, determined strokes of his crayon, he began sketching again. This time, not a star or a flag, but a tall man standing beside a veteran, both smiling. He leaned across the aisle, holding it out shyly. "This is you," he whispered to the veteran. The old soldier stared at the drawing. His weathered hands trembled as he took it, tracing the crayon lines with a fingertip. His throat tightened, but this time it wasn't from humiliation, it was from gratitude. His voice was soft, almost reverent. "Thank you, son. I'll keep this one safe." Seagal, watching quietly from his seat, nodded once in approval. He didn't need the applause or the spotlight. The moment spoke for itself. Heroes, big and small, had stood up today. The veteran folded the new drawing carefully, placing it inside his jacket pocket, close to his chest, as if it were a medal of its own. His eyes drifted to Seagal, who gave him a subtle nod. No words were needed. Around them, passengers who had once stayed silent now exchanged looks of respect. The businessman who had mocked earlier offered a sheepish smile, clearly ashamed. A woman leaned over and said softly to the veteran, "I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner." For the first time, silence wasn't heavy. It was thoughtful. The captain's voice broke through. "Ladies and gentlemen, remember, respect costs nothing. Let's never forget those who've given everything for our freedom." The words settled over the passengers like a blanket of truth. The boy finished his juice box and whispered to his mom, "Mom, today felt like a movie." She kissed his forehead. "No, sweetheart. Today it was real life and real heroes." As the plane soared into the sky, one message lingered, clear, unshakable, unforgettable. Silent doesn't mean invisible. Respect the ones who served, and the comments waiting to flood below would echo the same question. Where are you watching this from?